Dear students, welcome to today's lecture on Judith Butler. Judith Butler is one of the most influential contemporary political philosophers. Butler's contribution to queer theory cannot be overstated. Butler identifies as a gender non-binary and prefers to be addressed with the pronoun they. So today's lecture would use the pronouns they or their when referring to the philosopher as wherever it is appropriate. Born in 1956, Butler is one of the most iconic philosophers of 21st century. Judith Butler is influenced by psychoanalysis, phenomenology, speech act theory, and structural anthropology. Their work also greatly influenced the queer rights movement, and they were also influenced by the political movements in return. The most influential work by Butler is Gender Performativity, and it has been addressed in works like Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity, Bodies That Matter on the Discursive Limits of Sex, and Undoing Gender. Through their work, Butler challenged the essential understanding of gender and sex and has helped the people who are on the margins to resist oppressive structures which have been established and maintained by heteronormativity. Butler's formulations have helped shaped many foundational principles of queer theory, gender studies and feminist theories. Through their work, Butler advocates hospitality to otherness and difference in the quest for justice. In an interview given for the documentary called Examined Life 2008, Butler explains that they don't really subscribe to all stereotypes regarding their identity. Therefore, no single identity defines them. Fluidity remains the central aspect of Butler's theorizing of gender and sex, as well as they driven by postmodern impulses and distrust of ontological or epistemological categorizes, problematize and question any kind of fixed labeling. Today, we will discuss key contributions of Judith Butler, which include their theory of performativity. For Butler, there cannot be any separable self outside the culture. Seen from this perspective, the self is situated in the social and cultural where gender is constructed. Gender is therefore a project which is continuous and repetitive. Hence, Butler questions the gendered norms and illustrates that commonly associated behaviors with gender is basically a performance that one learns through normalization of heterosexuality. Butler goes on to question if an individual acts based on what is determined for us. Furthermore, the very act of performing gender constitutes our identity. Argued in this manner, the identity therefore is created by performance. This also means that whatever natural behavior that we assign to gender identity, this belief is a result of sanctions, taboos and coercions. This coercion also leads to creation of a domain of unthinkable bodies. This domain of unthinkable bodies limits our domain, therefore the autonomy. By outlining the performative nature of gender, Butler is able to challenge the understanding of gender. Gender, therefore, as natural does not exist. Gender reality is performative, which means quite simply that it is real only to the extent that it is performed. Gender, therefore, is not tied to material body, but a social construct, hence it can change or get challenged. They further argue that the carious acts of gender creates the idea of gender, and without those acts there would be no gender at all. Gender is thus a construction that regularly conceals its genesis. By explaining the historical and social origin of gender, Butler critiques heteronormativity. It is important to highlight here that Butler, unlike feminist scholars, questions the gender and sex distinction. Before Butler, the feminist scholarship made distinction of sex as biological and gender as social construction. For Butler, on the other hand, it does not make sense to talk about sex outside its social meaning. The meaning of human autonomy is retrospective. Gender, therefore, constructed differences between masculine and feminine. Sex is not a given on which gender is imposed, but a process whereby regulatory norms materialize sex and achieve this materialization through a forcible reiteration of those norms. In continuation of postmodernist philosophy, Butler believes that our conception of reality, in this case sex, is determined by language. They add sex becomes something like a fiction, perhaps a fantasy, retroactively installed at a pre-linguistic site to which there is no direct access. This linguistic construction is also not stable. It continuously creates boundaries, reinforcing performance of gender. Sex, therefore, is not biological, but a norm, and this norm keeps changing. However, Butler does not reduce gender to only linguistics. The gender act is not just in speaking, but also in doing. For gender to exist, it has to be constantly repeated. Butler's understanding of performativity examines social reality, not as something given, but continuously constructed. In speech act theory, Butler explains one produces what it names. In other words, by referring to norms, we enact them on everyday basis. The performative act here is the act of speaking, thereby enacting by our bodies. This performance of reality is where reality is constructed. By our performance of conventions, we make the natural, and it may appear real with consequences for people's lives. The performativity in this sense is not a role one plays, but an act that goes on even before one arrives, but requires to be performed in order to reproduce the said reality once more. In order to maintain heteronormative power, gender act has to be repeated in everyday activities. For Butler, the most basic personal acts are scripted by social conventions. If we stop the act or do it differently, we change the gender norm. Butler's views on gender and sex performativity have far-reaching implications for feminist theory as well as activism, apart from the larger society in general. Butler argues that in their attempt to challenge biological determinism, which remains the backbone of patriarchal conceptualizations of gender, feminists created a shared notion of gender which was supposed to be descriptive. However, any descriptive account tends to become normative as people tend to follow the descriptive narration's details. Such accounts, according to Butler, did not take into the account the multiplicity of cultural, social and political intersections in which the concrete array of women are constructed. This led to gender realist perspectives which were false, and they promoted a construct of woman which was not fluid enough to accommodate the diversity of experiences of people, leading to exclusion of many from the category of women. Butler argues that it was not as if those feminists were perpetrating a false account of what it is to be a woman, when they should have promoted a better account. Their fault, according to Butler, was even more fundamental, as any attempt to define who a woman is will inevitably lead to prescriptive normative criteria that will invariably lead to exclusion and discrimination of many who might not conform to those criteria. These prescriptive criteria tend to usually flow from socially dominant cultural groups, that is, like white, Western identities, thereby excluding the other groups. This leads to an expectation that individuals should have intelligible genders, which kind of flows from biological sex. Having problematized prevalent notions of both gender and sex, Butler rejects this notion and argues that seemingly socially incoherent gender sequences like homosexual behavior get marginalized or stigmatized because of such expectations. If gender is performative, they are not actually incoherent gender sequences, only deemed to be so by the society. There can be no gender incoherent behavior because all notions of gender, according to Butler, are performative and are only compelling illusions, which means gender is not a thing that is there, it is something one performs, which is socially conditioned. This means there is no one right way to do gender, which also means there is no wrong way to do gender as well. For Butler, same applies for sex. As noted before, Butler questions the biological emphasis which some feminists give to sexual categorizations, making it appear as if sexual categorization is more definitive, final and substantive than gender. Butler rejects this notion and writes, and I quote, "If the immutable character of sex is contested, perhaps this construct called sex is as culturally constructed as gender. Indeed, perhaps it was already gender, with the consequences that the distinction between sex and gender turns out to be no distinction at all." Unquote. Thus, Butler sees sex as socially constructed, not that different from gender. Sex is also performative. Butler is not arguing that sexual bodies do not exist in the material sense. They do. They are not questioning the reality of material bodies, but rather their point is that they do not exist in a social emptiness or come with intrinsic meanings. Sexual meanings and labels are given to bodies based on social conditioning, and sexual acts which arise out of those bodies are also performative. To give an example, when a doctor assigns a male or female label to a baby born with both reproductive organs by removing one of them, it is influenced by pre-existing social meanings and conditioning. Similarly, what a female or male body is supposed to do is also a product of social conditioning that happens in a society. For Butler, classification of any kind is necessarily oppressive, and this includes even sex assignment, which seeks to deny the body of the fluidity it possesses or can possess, and tries to create a fixed category arising out of dominant social conditioning. Butler's views on gender and sex have greatly enhanced our understanding of human existences itself and have deeply influenced emancipatory struggles of gender and sexual minorities across the world. Butler has been critical of feminists who desire or seek to a stable understanding of who a woman is, either for purpose of conceptualization or even for practical purposes, that is for political activism. With respect to theorizing, Butler maintains that any descriptive account who a woman is bound to become prescriptive and thereby exclusionary to trans women or other kinds of non-heterosexual gender and sexual identities. recognizing the fluidity of gender and sexual identities is necessary in their view to acknowledge multiple existences. They therefore argue that feminists should desist from defining the term woman in a definitive way, as defining itself can be oppressive. With respect to feminist political activism, Butler makes the case that the category of women need not be the foundation of feminist political activism, but rather feminists should focus on understanding the social construction of gender and sex in order to emancipate those who are marginalized by flushing out how power shapes our dominant social meanings and lives. They argue that first one does not have to be a woman to be a feminist, and we should not confuse the categories. Men who are feminists, non-binary and trans people who are feminists are part of the movement if they hold to the basic propositions of freedom and equality that are part of any feminist political struggle. When laws and social policies represent women, they make tacit decisions about who counts as a woman and very often make presuppositions about what a woman is. We have seen this in the domain of reproductive rights. So, the question I was asking then is, do we need to have a settled idea of women or of any gender in order to advance feminist goals? In recent years, Butler has focused on areas of political exclusion. They talk about a concept of grievable life. This refers to the lives that are never publicly mourned because they are not acknowledged as alive. Butler refers to AIDS survivors, Palestinians, blacks or refugees who die without being publicly mourned. Butler points out the precarity of lives such as these populations whose exclusions are justified through frames of war. It is to counter such frame that Butler proposes non-violence by propounding that we become ourselves only in relation to others. This would mean no life is fully secure or independent. Performing non-violence is the ethical issue, and to have a livable life depends on condition that allows others to live. Butler has also worked on the performative aspects of assembly and public protests. Their works continue to expand the horizons of philosophy by questioning settled notions in order to bring out the complex reality of existences. So, to summarize, I should say that in the vibrant landscape of contemporary political philosophy, few names shine as brightly as Judith Butler's, a towering figure whose influence is felt far beyond academia. Butler's contributions to queer theory stand as a testament to the power of rigorous intellectual inquiry intertwined with personal identity. Butler's philosophical journey began in an era of shifting paradigms and burgeoning social movements. Their impact resonates not only in academic circles but also across broader society. Central to understanding Butler's philosophy is recognizing their self-identification as gender non-binary. Addressing them with the pronouns they or them or their is not just an acknowledgement of grammatical correctness, but a recognition of their identity as a foundational aspect of their work. Their lived experience infuses their scholarship with a depth and authenticity that enriches their insights into the complexities of gender and identity. Steeped in a diverse array of influences, Butler's philosophical roots extend into psychoanalysis, phenomenology, speak-act theory, and structural anthropology, as I already mentioned. Their multidisciplinary approach underlines their commitment to unraveling the intricate fabric of human existence from multiple vantage points. Furthermore, Butler's work serves as a two-way bridge connecting academia and political activism. Their theories have not only influenced social movements, but have also been nurtured and expanded by the very activism they inspired. This interplay between scholarship and action exemplifies the dynamic synergy that can arise when rigorous thought meets lived experience. At the heart of Butler's transformative oeuvre lies the concept of gender performativity. This notion, eloquently articulated in their seminal works as mentioned earlier, by challenging the essentialist notion of gender as an inherent and fixed attribute, Butler propounds that gender is not an identity one possesses, but an identity one enacts. In essence, it is not something one is, but something one does. This groundbreaking insight has profound implications, unmasking the performative nature of gender and deconstructing the confines of normative heteronormativity. Butler's exploration of the performative nature of gender unfurls a cascade of critical analysis. It delves into the intersection of language and reality, revealing how our very utterances construct and reinforce the social structures that define our lives. The concept of performativity underscores the agency that individuals wield in shaping their identities, while simultaneously laying bare the coercive forces that attempt to mold and regulate those identities. Gender performativity unshackles us from the confines of preconceived norms, inviting us to embrace fluidity and resist the categorization that often stifles authenticity. Beyond dismantling the gender binary, Butler's ideas resonate with postmodern impulses. Their rejection of fixed labels and categorical definitions extends to sex itself. Butler astutely observes that the category of sex is not an immutable biological fact, but a construct shaped by language and social norms. This deconstruction of sex and gender challenges our preconceptions, urging us to perceive identity as a dynamic interplay of language, power, and lived experience. Moreover, Butler's philosophical journey intersects with the terrain of ethics and activism. They advocate for a politics of hospitality to otherness and difference, fostering an inclusive space where diverse voices can flourish. Their exploration of grievable life delves into the ethics of mourning, highlighting the lives that often remain unacknowledged in the public sphere due to the workings of power. Butler's call for nonviolence and the interdependence of lives underscores the interconnectedness that binds us all, urging us to embrace an ethical stance that upholds the dignity and value of every individual. Dear students, as we conclude our exploration of Judith Butler's transformative ideas, I encourage you to reflect on the profound impact of their work in the realms of philosophy, gender studies, and activism. Butler's intellectual journey has illuminated new pathways of thought and action, challenging conventional norms and urging us to embrace the complexities of human existence. From their foundation or foundational concept of gender performativity to their rejection of fixed categories and labels, Butler's insights have reshaped our understanding of identity and power dynamics. They have offered us a fresh lens through which to analyze the interplay of language, society, and individual agency, highlighting the ways in which our very words and actions construct the realities we inhabit is possible. Butler's intersectional approach, drawing from psychoanalysis, phenomenology, speech act theory and structural anthropology, has demonstrated the richness that emerges when we bridge disciplinary boundaries. Their journey has inspired a symphony of thought and action, echoing across academic halls and inspiring activism that challenges oppressive structures. So, as you continue your academic journey, remember the importance of engaging with perspectives that challenge the status quo. Butler's ideas remind us that intellectual growth comes from questioning assumptions, embracing fluidity, and recognizing the inherent power in our words and actions. Let their work serve as a reminder that philosophy is not confined to abstract ideas. It has the potential to shape societies, dismantle inequalities, and empower those who have been marginalized. Butler's exploration of grievable life speaks to the ethical imperative of recognizing and valuing all lives, regardless of how society may label or categorize them. As you embark on your own paths, consider how you can contribute to a more inclusive world, a world that embraces difference, challenges oppressive norms, and uplifts voices that have been silenced. In the journey of knowledge, be open to transformation. Embrace Butler's call to break free from rigid categories, engage in critical self-reflection, and cultivate empathy for diverse experiences. Through their legacy, let us remember that change is not only possible but essential for progress. As you carry forward the torch of intellectual exploration, may you find inspiration in Judith Butler's unwavering commitment to unraveling the complexities of our existence. Let their ideas guide your inquiry, encourage your activism, and remind you of profound potential of thought to shape our world. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of Butler's ideas, and may your own journey be marked by the same courage to challenge, transform, and create. See you in another lecture.